It was a damp Thursday morning in early autumn when David Beckham stepped off the black cab onto the narrow pavement of Leytonstone High Road. A soft drizzle painted the red bricks darker and left a faint mist in the air. He pulled the brim of his flat cap down gently and zipped up his wool coat. The air smelled like wet concrete and fresh memories. He hadn't been home in years. Not truly. Not since the press, the stardom, the flights between continents, the fashion weeks and boardroom meetings. But now, walking past the small corner bakery that once sold 20p jam donuts, he felt like the boy again. The one who used to juggle a tennis ball in alleyways with holes in his shoes and dreams far too big for East London. His mother, Sandra, had recently undergone minor surgery and insisted she didn't need help. So naturally he came anyway. He always did. She was in good spirits, still making her tea far too sweet and telling him to eat more even though he was nearly 50. But today after lunch, with the rain still misting the window panes, he took a walk. Alone. With no paparazzi. No bodyguards. Just himself. Like old times. He turned into Gainsborough Primary School side street and paused outside the black iron gate. It had rusted, the paint peeling in quiet defiance. The school looked smaller, or perhaps he had just grown too big. He leaned against the gate and exhaled. Across the street was a small cafe, not there in his time. He crossed over, craving warmth more than caffeine. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and old books. It had just 5 tables. In the back corner, 2 elderly women sat near the rain-blurred window, sipping tea and chatting in gentle tones. Beckham nodded at the barista and quietly ordered an Earl Grey. Then mid-sip he heard it. Margaret Hill, the English teacher, remember her? He froze. She's in Rosevale Hospice now, poor thing, the other woman replied. Still scribbling in notebooks. Still correcting people's grammar. Bless her. Beckham turned slightly. She always said, the first woman continued, I don't need a statue. I just want to hear a stadium call my name. What? Just once. They laughed softly. But something in David's chest tightened. Mrs. Hill. She wasn't just an English teacher. She was the teacher. The one who let him stay behind after school to finish homework he didn't understand. The one who noticed he kept writing letters to football clubs and told him his writing mattered. The one who taught him how to deliver a speech without mumbling. The one who said, after giving back a half-done essay, David, you may never love books, but your words will someday move people. Just make sure they're true. She was the one who saw the boy behind the ball. He finished his tea in silence, eyes misted not by the steam. That night he looked up Rosevale Hospice. It was a 35-minute drive. He didn't sleep much. His mind replayed every moment, from the first time she handed him a clean notebook, to the time she told him she saw him one day being more than just a footballer. And in the morning, before his driver could ask where to, Beckham simply said, Rosevale, I'd like to see someone. But he didn't go in that day. He stood across the street and watched, and made a call, to Wembley. The grey skies hung low over London as Beckham sat in the back of a parked car outside the hospice. His fingers hovered over the phone screen, then tapped. A moment later, the call connected. Martin. It's David. I need a favor. Wembley. The man on the other end didn't hesitate. Talk to me. Beckham laid out his idea with the quiet determination of a man who had already decided. It wasn't for the press. It wasn't for some documentary. It was for a woman who once told a 13-year-old boy that words mattered just as much as goals. That same afternoon, Beckham met with 2 event coordinators from Wembley in a side lounge under the stadium. The smell of turf still lingered faintly in the air. He outlined what he wanted. A single afternoon, just one, when the stadium would open for someone who had never played there, never coached, never sung a national anthem. It has to feel real, Beckham said. She wanted to hear a stadium call her name. She deserves that. They looked at one another, then nodded. That night, Beckham returned home and began writing a letter. Not a press release. Not a speech. A letter. Dear Mrs. Hill, it's David Beckham. But I suppose I'll always be that boy who couldn't sit still in the 3rd row to you. I heard you're not doing so well and that you had one wish left. I'd like to help make it come true. He stopped writing after that line. His hand trembled a little. It had been decades since he wrote something not curated, not reviewed by a publicist. Over the next few days, he coordinated with the hospice director. They agreed to keep it quiet. The official excuse would be a private visit to encourage patient morale. Beckham paid out of pocket for renovations to the hospice van, ensuring it could accommodate Margaret's fragile state without making her uncomfortable. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Wembley came alive. Speakers were calibrated. A pre-recorded stadium announcement was voiced by the same announcer who once read Beckham's name in the 2002 World Cup. Volunteers from a local drama school were recruited to simulate a small crowd, just enough to sound like a real ovation. Beckham personally selected the music. Not a national anthem, not a hymn, but a slow instrumental version of Jerusalem, Mrs. Hill's favorite. The night before the big day, he visited his childhood home. He sat in his old bedroom, the posters of Manchester United long gone, the walls freshly painted. But the window still creaked when opened. From there, he could see the roof of Gainsborough Primary. He thought of the essay he never finished, of how Mrs. Hill once said, "One day you'll make a sentence that stops people, not just a ball." He hoped tomorrow would be that sentence. Early the next morning, Margaret Hill was wheeled out of the hospice and into the specially prepared van. She wore a soft burgundy scarf and a tweed coat. Her hands, frail but elegant, clutched a worn notebook. The hospice nurse Olivia gently whispered to her, "We have a surprise today." When they arrived at Wembley, the gates opened silently. The air was crisp. Margaret's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Beckham, waiting just inside the entrance, approached slowly. He knelt down. "Hello, Miss Hill. Still correcting my grammar in your head?" She smiled, thin and tired but bright. "You forgot the comma after hello," she said. They laughed. He pushed her wheelchair through the tunnel and out onto the field. Sunlight spilled across the empty stands. As they reached the center circle, the PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman who taught a generation not just how to write but how to mean it. The woman behind the words, Mrs. Margaret Hill." From hidden speakers came a roar of applause. The simulated crowd rose. Some clapped. Others waved scarves with her name. Margaret froze. Tears filled her eyes. She looked around as the sound surrounded her. "Is this real?" Beckham leaned closer. "Real enough for me. Real enough for every word you ever taught me." As Jerusalem played softly in the background, Beckham pulled a chair beside her. They sat in silence. The soundscape of celebration slowly faded into birdsong. But Margaret's smile remained. She whispered, "Now I know how it feels." He reached for her hand. "You always knew. You just forgot." They stayed there long after the last note faded. No press. No interviews. Just the final wish of a woman who once believed in a boy with a dream too loud for a classroom. And the man who made sure her dream got the stadium it deserved. The day after the private tribute at Wembley, London awoke as it always did. Double-decker buses roaring through damp streets, commuters holding coffee cups, tourists snapping pictures outside the tower. To the city, nothing had changed. But to David Beckham, something profound had taken root. He couldn't stop seeing her face. Mrs. Hill, sitting in that wheelchair, frail but glowing, eyes wide with disbelief as her name echoed through the stadium. The sound of applause filling air that had once carried his own victories now belonged to her. And the tears that streamed down her cheeks. He knew they had carried decades of silence, of a life lived without recognition. It wasn't enough, he thought. Wembley had given her a voice for one afternoon. But what about the world beyond the gates? What about the country that forgot her name? Beckham spent the following days restless. He attended charity meetings, visited his mother, even went jogging along Regent's Park, but everywhere he went the thought followed him. Mrs. Hill deserved more. She had written essays no one read, corrected papers that no one remembered, and taught children who had grown old and forgotten. If Wembley was her once-in-a-lifetime ovation, then he wanted to make sure it wasn't her last. He called Martin again. "I need something bigger," he said. Martin chuckled on the other end. "You already filled Wembley with her name, mate. What's bigger than that?" Beckham's voice grew quiet. "The memory of it. Something that lasts." So they planned. 1 week later, Beckham returned to Rosevale Hospice, not as a quiet visitor standing across the street, but openly, with flowers in hand and a smile that broke through the whispers of the staff. Margaret was sitting near the window in her room, her notebook open on her lap. She was scribbling, her handwriting trembling but stubborn. "Miss Hill," he said softly as he entered. She looked up. Her eyes flickered with recognition and she smiled. "Mr. Beckham, have you corrected your commas yet?" "Working on it," he said, pulling a chair closer. "But I brought something better." He placed a small box on the table beside her. Inside was a framed photograph, her and him sitting in the middle of Wembley's pitch with sunlight streaming through the stands. Beneath it was an engraved plaque that read, "To Mrs. Margaret Hill, the teacher who made words matter." She touched the glass with a shaking hand. For a moment she couldn't speak. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Yes, you do, he replied firmly. More than me, more than most players who ever stood there. They spent the afternoon reminiscing. She reminded him of the essay he never finished about Shakespeare. He reminded her of the letter she once helped him draft to Manchester United's youth coach. They laughed at the memory of his terrible spelling and her insistence that handwriting mattered. And when the nurse brought tea, Beckham poured hers the way she liked, 2 sugars, no milk. But as the daylight faded, he noticed how tired she had grown. Her hand slipped from the notebook. Her voice slowed. He realized then that the days left were few. And he knew he had to act fast. The following week, a short video quietly appeared online. It wasn't uploaded by Beckham's team, but by one of the drama students who had been part of the crowd at Wembley. The video showed Mrs. Hill wheeled onto the pitch, her name booming across the stadium, her tears catching the light. In less than 48 hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Teachers across the UK commented. Former students she had once taught began writing tributes. Newspapers picked it up, not as a sports headline but as a story of gratitude. David Beckham honors former teacher's final wish at Wembley, one headline read. Beckham hadn't wanted publicity, but he didn't fight it either. He understood that some stories needed to be told. And when he returned to the hospice again, he found Margaret surrounded by cards and flowers sent by strangers, students, and old colleagues. You've started a mess, Mr. Beckham, she teased, her voice thin but playful. My room looks like a florist's shop. He laughed. Good. About time you had a little chaos of your own. But beneath the humor he saw something else, her pride. For the first time in years, she was being remembered not as an old woman in a hospice bed, but as a teacher who mattered. And that, Beckham thought, was worth every headline. One evening as he prepared to leave, Margaret called him back. Her eyes were glistening, her breath shallow. David, she whispered. That day in Wembley, it was more than a dream. It was my life told back to me. I can go now knowing I wasn't invisible. He gripped her hand tightly. You were never invisible. Not to me. As he walked out into the night, the air was sharp with London cold. He pulled his coat tighter, his heart heavy yet light. Heavy with the knowledge that time was running out, but light with the certainty that he had given her something eternal. The boy from Leytonstone, once scolded for daydreaming in class, had returned not as a star, but as a man who kept a promise, one that was never spoken but always understood. And somewhere deep inside, Beckham knew this wasn't just about her wish. It was about every teacher who had ever been forgotten. About gratitude that comes too late for most. And about the rare chance to say, thank you, in a way the whole world could hear. The phone call came quietly, on a grey morning when Beckham was sipping coffee by the window of his London townhouse. It was the hospice nurse, Olivia. Her voice was soft, careful, carrying the weight of news she had delivered too many times before. Mr. Beckham, she passed peacefully last night. In her sleep. Notebook by her side. Beckham lowered his eyes, the rim of the coffee cup trembling slightly in his hand. He whispered a thank